This is Tenzin Gyatso, otherwise known as the Dalai Lama. In the Western world, he's held up as a prime example of an enlightened man, a wise and peaceful man who has suffered greatly ever since China annexed his homeland, a champion of equality, freedom and the advancement of science. I've never heard anyone criticize him, but let's be honest here, he's a bit of a dick. The Dalai Lama was born in 1935. At the time, Tibet was an independent state. The Dalai Lama held full power within Tibet. It was an absolute dictatorship. He was selected as the 14th Dalai Lama at the age of 4, and he assumed full power at age 15. That was shortly after Tibet was invaded by Chinese forces. The Dalai Lama cooperated with the Chinese, and was allowed to keep some amount of power within Tibet. But in 1959 there was an uprising within Tibet, where Tibetan guerrillas attacked the Chinese. The uprising failed, and fearing retaliation, the Dalai Lama fled to India, where he still lives today. Since then, he's gone on to do a lot of humanitarian work. But humanitarian work can only make up for so much. I know he was only in his early 20s at the time, but that's old enough to know slavery is wrong. While he was in power, 95% of Tibetans lived in feudal serfdom, which isn't quite as bad as slavery, but it's not much better. I don't believe any amount of humanitarian work can make up for operating a system of serfdom, and I'm not saying their current government is doing a better job. It is possible that both are bad. Buddhist monks within Tibet were free to exploit those in lower castes. It was common for them to masturbate onto young children. The Dalai Lama was 24 when he lost power. That's too old to avoid responsibility. There's a reason we still prosecute Nazi war criminals. Some crimes can never be forgiven, but no one talks about this. No one talks about Tibet being ruled by child-abusing monks. They don't actually have sex with children, as ancient Buddhist texts forbid that. I refer specifically to a text called The Case of the Monk with a Long Penis. And I promise that's real. I promise. At the end of the day, a dictator is a dictator. The Dalai Lama held power as a dictator. If returned, he would once again be a dictator. But that's not even the worst thing about the Dalai Lama. Steven Seagal is something of a student to him. Steven Seagal is a dickhead, yet Steven Seagal has been declared a Lama. That basically means he's a reincarnated god, putting only the Dalai Lama above him in the Tibetan Buddhist hierarchy. I can think of dozens of people more deserving of Lama status. Bobby Jindal, Angelina Jolie, maybe even Keemstar. The Dalai Lama has been neglecting these people in favor of Steven Seagal. On a more serious note, the Dalai Lama is literally a con man. He claims to be the reincarnation of an important Buddhist deity. I don't believe him, and I know most of you watching this don't believe him either, so we can only assume he's lying. If he is lying, that would make him a terrible person. To deliberately mislead millions of people regarding something that important, that would be unforgivable. I don't believe his ridiculous claim to be a reincarnated god. I'm not saying there's no value in the movement he leads, or that Tibet should remain under Chinese control, just that the Dalai Lama has done some unforgivable things, not least of all neglecting Keemstar, and also running a theocratic serfdom. That's never a good thing. The Dalai Lama simply doesn't deserve the love and respect people show him. Just because a person seems nice and kind and warm and loving doesn't mean they really are. People loved Joseph Stalin. Those who suffered under his leadership mourned him just like other Russians. When confronted with evidence of his wrongdoing, they only became more ardent supporters of him. We know from modern studies how common that is. When presented with opposing evidence, some people only further embrace their beliefs. That's why supporters of equality idolize Fidel Castro, despite his legacy of discrimination. And in the same sense, many will refuse to accept what the Dalai Lama is.